Everyone, this is Joe Pagan. I am the Solutions Engineering Manager in the Central Region with Splunk. And today we have with us Steve Aiello, with the Security and Compliance Practice Director at AHAD. So one of the things when we talk about SOAR, right, Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response, is that it's tough. It's tough to trust the automation. It's tough to adapt. It's tough to make that bold leap forward without having some guidance. And whenever you take on anything major like that, a major undertaking, you need to have a strong Sherpa. That's why I'm excited to talk about this today with Steve at AHAD. They've taken keen interest and big investment in SOAR and have decided to go full throttle on Phantom. And they're going to talk today, Steve is going to talk today about what they've done with other customers as well as internally in their own organization with regards to SOAR. So without further ado, Steve, cheers.
Thank you very much. Am I coming through okay?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Excellent. Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody for taking the time to join the webinar. I have never, ever met a security practitioner that has an abundance of time. Generally, it is the opposite of that. So hopefully, this is the first part of a two-part series where we're going to be discussing security automation. This one is a little bit of a higher level, team structure, things like that. Give you a little bit of an introduction to ourselves, and then the next one that we plan on putting on will get more technical in nature, digging down into a little bit more of the deep dive playbooks that we've written, how we've integrated into various platforms that you would find in a traditional enterprise. So thank you all very much for your interest. And then how would you like to handle questions? Kim, do you want to wait till the end, or do you want to pepper them throughout?
Let's wait till the end, and we can post them in chat.
Okay. All right. Perfect. So a little bit about myself. A lot of certifications. I'm tired of paying $80 a year to renew, but I lead the security and compliance practice at AHAD. I'm our practice director there, and been very, very happy to work at AHAD for about 3.5 years now. Worked on the customer side for about 15 years in a variety of environments. Have a background in both infrastructure and in security. I've ran infrastructure teams and security teams, and worked in pretty much data centers my entire career for about 22 years now. And when AHAD decided to formalize its security practice about 3 years ago, we had some basic tenets. And if you are a fan of security, you might know the gentleman on the screen, and you might say, hey, this gentleman does not work for AHAD, he works for IBM. And that's true. The gentleman that you're looking at is Bruce Schneier, great American security thinker, cryptographer, and has been a huge, huge influence on us in how we look at security. And so when AHAD, thinks about security, when we're interfacing with our customers, we have sort of 3 fundamental tenets that we think about. One, that security is a process, not a product. When I was on the customer side, every time an air quotes security professional would come and talk to me, it was always about this new shiny thing they wanted me to purchase. And I think folks that have been in the industry for a long time, they understand that some products are essential, but it's really the processes that are in place and how you develop those processes, which really help you move your security program forward. And for better or for worse, the second thing that we think about is we have to focus on threats that are most prevalent and that have proven to lead to data compromise. Outside of the unfortunate medical emergency that we're in as a country and as a world, the media is very, very good at keeping new and creative exploits in front of us. And I was doing a speaking engagement probably about 3-4 months ago, and a gentleman who did not work in the industry field or in the energy field at all, he asked me, said, I keep reading about this Stuxnet thing. And I just sort of looked at him puzzled, and I said, well, are you an energy generator? Do you work with centrifuges? And he's like, no, not at all. I'm not even in the energy industry. And I said, well, then why are you worried about Stuxnet? And if you look at the data, right? If you look at, the Verizon data breach incident report, the Cisco M-Trends, Ponemon Institute, Rapid7 under the hoodie, there are sort of 7 things that that comprise over 99% of data breaches. In these 7 things, matched in common or matched, they are part of 99% of data breaches, and everybody knows them, right? An email phish, vulnerable web application, installation of command and control, capturing credentials, lateral movement, authentication to data using credentials, and then either data destruction or data exfiltration. So when we think about our first piece of having a process, and then we think about those 7 things that have been proven to be a part of 99% of data breaches, it gives us a really good starting place to start thinking about what we should be automating or thinking about automating in our environments. If we know that 7 actions are responsible in some combination for over 99% of data breaches, those 7 things are probably a really good thing to start thinking about automating. And then lastly, we don't hear a lot about quality of outcomes in security. I live in Michigan, so huge manufacturing base. So, people talk about ISO 9001, they talk about 6 Sigma, things like that, to ensure the quality of those processes. And at AHEAD, when we consult with different organizations, we're focused on all of these things, but a lot of the times we're helping people mature their processes. And one of the ways, once you have a good set of mature processes and you've aligned them to those threat actions, that you can improve the quality of those processes is by automating them, right? I'm a big fan of people. For a security practitioner, I enjoy interfacing with people very much. But as great as people are, we are immensely fallible, right? We do not execute the same task over and over again with a great level of accuracy. So, AHEAD decided from the very beginning, these were the 3 pillars that were going to underlie our security practice. So turning a little bit more to the direct topic, what is security automation? And I want to try to get people to think about it a little bit differently. I've had folks, I was shocked, some very large tech companies that have told me that they were scared to go all in on security automation. And these are the types of companies that I thought for sure they would be all in. So what is security automation, right? This is sort of a technical definition. I honestly, I forget where I got this from. It was from a Deloitte or a Gartner or something like that. But it says security automation is the automatic handling of security operations related tasks. It is the process of executing these tasks, such as scanning for vulnerabilities without human intervention. So, we talk about vulnerability scanning right there. And what I say to folks that might be a little bit hesitant to really invest in security automation is that you're doing it today. You just don't realize it. Outside of one customer, and this is a true story, I've never met an organization that said, we write all of our own tests to test vulnerabilities that come out every month. We had one customer in Chicago. The CISO said he did not trust vulnerability scanning tools. He did not remain the CISO for long. But we are using automation in such a prolific way in security, but we don't really think about it as automation. Vulnerability scanning is automated. Patch management is a form of automation. Ingesting security data into your SIEM and then correlating it is a piece of automation. So when we think about the possibilities for security automation, we are now in a place where technology is allowing us to create more and more technically advanced automation activities. And it's really important. So if you're worried or concerned about security automation, if you have good processes in place, you can really do some amazing things. And just reiterating, right, you would never run around patching your whole environment. I mean, we've got customers, the largest data center I worked in, we had about 250,000 systems across a couple of our data centers, and there would be no possible way that we could go out and patch 250,000 systems by hand. It would be impossible. I mean, imagine that your Patch Tuesday would extend months on end. And again, there was only one individual that I've ever heard in my 22 years of security that said that they didn't trust their vulnerability scanner and their teams were making, proof of concept exploits for all of the vulnerabilities and testing them manually. So when we think about security automation, it's an advancement of something that we're very, very used to doing today. So what is causing an explosion in workload automation, specifically from the security side? The reality is that it's a very, very difficult job, right? I mean, we think patch management was difficult at scale. We think vulnerability scanning is difficult at scale. When you think about the activities that a SOC has to perform, it's very difficult. It's really sort of a thankless job. And this was an article that was produced for CSO Online, and it was last year, about 10 months ago. It was published on July 31st. And it caught my eye because it says, working in a SOC is so stressful that 2/3 of employees want to leave. And if you can see the little highlighted, the highlighted piece at the bottom there, it's not just that they don't like their employer. It's not that they want to quit their current job. They're considering getting out of the whole field because the job is just that difficult. We're faced with just such a huge volume of alerts. You've got firewall logs, you've got AD logs, you've got your proxy logs, you've got your endpoint logs, you've got an EDR solution. And the ability to, bring all of this data into a centralized platform, to correlate the data, that's an amazing first step. But then to have an analyst really dig into every single event in a meaningful way is almost impossible. We were talking to an organization up in Minnesota. They do large scale manufacturing, and they said, we're dealing with 25,000 events per second. We want to make sure that we are looking at every single possible event to protect our IP. They're a global manufacturer, which means that there's 2,500 roughly events that they wanted to look through every day. How do you do that? So we're going to talk a little bit about, how to automate that. And up until, fairly recently, you only had a few options to help your team alleviate that burden. You could build it yourself, right? You could build a traditional SOC. It's very, very expensive to do so if you need to staff it with people. You could outsource it to an MSSP. And when I would talk to different organizations, I would ask them, I would say, how happy are you with your MSSP? And they'd say, they do an okay job, right? They open up tickets for us, and they alert us on certain things. The hard part or the struggle with what we've seen with a lot of organizations that we work with is that many times the MSSP is sort of a black box, and security teams lose a lot of control. Sharing one story, we were working with a hospital organization in North Carolina, and we were helping them prepare their security team for a move to the public cloud. Head does a lot of cloud work and a lot of security work, and many times they go hand in hand. Talking with the CISO, he was in the room, we had a group of their staff, and we were talking about some of the security controls that they had in play. And they said, well, we're not really sure how we handle this. We were going through the CIS controls. They said, we're not really sure how we handle this because we've outsourced it to our managed service provider or MSSP. And so, well, why don't we call them? Why don't we try to understand really what's going on? And so we called the MSSP, we got them on the phone. And one of their concerns, for example, was when somebody from their AWS team, they wanted to know why, when the root account in AWS was being used, why it wasn't flagging an alert. And the response from the MSSP team said, well, that's not a canned alert that we have in the SIM that we use. I said, oh, but that's pretty important. So the ability for a security team to clearly understand what is being monitored and what is not being monitored is of absolute importance. And so what we've seen, at least at AHEAD, in the last, I would say we really started to see a shift in this. It started maybe 12 to 18 months ago, and it really has accelerated, significantly accelerated in the last 3 to 6 months. In fact, it's almost part of every single conversation that I'm having with security leaders. I got off a phone call with a CISO down south, very, very large logistics organization. And they said one of their primary goals and objectives is as they are building their internal SOC, they currently use an MSSP. They said, we know that we can't scale people linearly with the volume of alerts that we have to deal with. And so automation was absolutely on the forefront of this gentleman's mind. And so we need to leverage automation, not just for the sake of automation, but for the same reason why we leveraged automation for patch management, for vulnerability management, because it makes our security teams much more effective, right? Much more effective with the hours that they have in the day. So I'm going to get a little bit into the weeds here, and we're going to talk about why, at least at AHEAD, we believe this has changed so much in the last 12 to 18 months. So we've talked about what is security automation, theoretically. What is it really? Right? What is it if you had to point it out and say, this is what security automation, is at its core? What is security automation? Security automation is the ability to take action generally based on RESTful APIs. What does that mean? For those of you who are not developers, what does that mean? Generally, when we interface with security products, we go to a console, we look at the data presented to us in a console, or we go to a console and we set up a report, and that report is generated. It may be emailed to us, and then a human being takes, hopefully, a well-defined set of actions as a response to the data in that console or in that report. That is one way of interfacing with our security platforms. When we start to think about security automation, what we're really discussing is codifying the tribal knowledge that security teams have, which, I know means documentation, and nobody likes documentation, but it is so important to actually document what the security team does and how they respond to issues. And then we take those set of standards and steps and processes, and we say, okay, what data is available to us via an API? So this is just a snippet of an event, a part of an event that we grabbed from an internal EDR tool that we use. And, we can actually see the command that was executed, the target command, the target DLL that was going to be acted on. And so there's a whole host of information that you can get. So in this case, let's say we wanted to understand if somebody was trying to capture credentials. I'm going to nerd out for a little bit. Generally, the capture of credentials is done by targeting the LSAS process, right? You use the debug privilege to inject a piece of malicious code into the LSAS process, and then you can extract the hashes from the LSAS process. So we would want to use an EDR solution or some sort of endpoint monitoring solution. And when this chunk of code, generally in a JSON format, comes back, we would say, oh, we saw this offending process, right? Maybe the offending process was spawned by Outlook or Google Chrome or, a PDF document or something like that. We're able to see that the target for that, malicious activity was the LSAS process. We know that that's bad. Our security team should have a defined set of steps and actions on how to respond when they see process hollowing in the LSAS process. We know we should take an immediate step of actions, whether it's investigating further, quarantining the device, correlating logs with various firewalls, and all of those steps that your security team would be doing manually, we now want to start writing code in order to execute those steps, and it's all based on APIs. And the reason why I believe that we've seen this be, so transformative in the last, 6 months to 18 months is that now vendors are coming to market that allow you to interface with their platforms via an API, like you're seeing a snippet of on the screen. And so that's huge. So when you're thinking about your SOC or when you're thinking about security automation, understanding the ecosystem that you have and the tools at your disposal are just so critically important. And so that's one of the things that we talk about with organizations. How do you understand what your capabilities are today? How do you understand what your tool sets will allow you to do? If you know that you want to drive towards security automation and make your employees more effective in the SOC and reduce the operational burden and the stress on them, you need to start making the right decisions to build out your tool set to support security automation. So this is so important. A lot of times, ahead as a vendor, we do work, we sell products, right? But, we focus on process. And so many times, folks are enamored with, the newest, shiniest blinky box, or, maybe it's the vendor that gives you the most tchotchkes, right? I will say Splunk has some pretty awesome shirts. I like those, but really we need to start making the tooling rationale based on our end goals, right? In understanding what that end goal is. And if security automation is the end goal, then you need to make sure that you're selecting platforms that allow you to build that automation. This is a critically important piece. You can have some level of automation, but if the tools in your ecosystem don't support the initiative, it will be much harder to take advanced actions. So what was ahead's compelling event to invest in security automation? Our company was growing at a very rapid pace. It all blurs together. In 2019, we probably went from a company of 300 people to a company by the beginning of 2020 to 650 people. And, that was all inside of 18 months. And our team, even though our primary focus is to be with customers and to deliver services to customers, my team was being escalated to whenever we had an internal security event that needed to be investigated. And when I sat down and when I looked at, how my team was spending their time, I started to ask them, well, for every one of these investigations that are coming in, how much time are we spending, right? If you're supposed to be with a customer, let's say Bob, one of my guys, but yet you had to spend, a day and a half on investigating internal IT incidents, that's not very helpful for my practice. Even though we're happy to help our internal organization, that wasn't very beneficial. And when we started talking, we said, we had a very specific playbook. We knew how we were going to respond to incidents. And they said, well, depending on the seniority level of the analyst, for every event that we really investigate, it takes about 60 to 90 minutes to run through our whole playbook by hand. So on average, about 75 minutes. And I knew that as we were growing as a company, we doubled in size. I wasn't going to get, extra headcount on my team to absorb all this workload. And so we knew we had to do something to be more efficient, right? We had to do something. We also knew, just seeing the trend and seeing how much the landscape was going to change, we knew that security automation was going to be a huge go-to-market for us in 2020. We knew that we had to develop these capabilities, not just internally, but for our customers externally. And so in the beginning of 2019, we really started to go heads down and really try to figure out not just security automation as a technology, but how did it impact us as a team? How was it going to impact the number of people that I needed to hire? How would it impact the costs of performing security operations within our organization? And so those are some of the things that we want to chat about now. And if you just do some just very, very back of the napkin math, right? Most organizations, they have many phishing emails a day. They have drive-by downloads. They might have web-based attacks. Like, you're fortunate if you're only seeing 20 attacks a day. I think from the industry data, the reality is that people are seeing dozens, if not thousands of attacks a day. Going back to that manufacturer up in Minnesota, they said they had 2,500 events a day. So this is absolutely a realistic assessment, most likely underscoped. But if you're paying a fully burdened, security engineer $100,000 a year, you've got 60 to 90 minutes per investigation. That's 25 hours of work every day, right? It's 25 hours of work every day. So you've got about 5 FTEs that you would need to cover that if you wanted to look at everything. And so you've got about $500,000 in employee costs. Now, generally, senior security engineers are more than $100,000 fully burdened when you add, taxes and benefits and all of those sort of things. And most organizations are experiencing many, many more attacks than 20 a day. So, but I wanted just some easy to digest numbers here. So when you think about your team, I would say think about how many attacks they're really investigating, right? How many attacks are they really investigating? And what we've seen as a response to this, and we've had CISOs of very large organizations say, well, I only have 3 FTEs. I get many alerts a day. We have deemed that this critical web application is tier 1 to the customer. So my 3 FTEs only look at web vulnerabilities. We are praying that our AV system is blocking effectively. We're not investigating those alerts. We don't have any meaningful email phishing investigation set up. And so they just choose not to look at all of the data that they could look at. And that's a huge problem. It's basically acknowledging the fact that, you are only going to look at part of the evil, if you will. And so when that happens, unfortunately, that's why we see so many organizations, with data compromise, data breaches, flaws in their security program, because just due to either budget, and even organizations that have the budget. We've had hospitals, healthcare organizations that they're larger, but they're in more remote areas, and say, we've got budget for 3 more FTEs. Nobody's applying. Nobody wants to come and work at a healthcare company versus a fintech company who will have a bunch of money to throw at the problem. So a lot of times we're seeing, even if you do have FTEs, it can be very, very difficult to fill them in specific industries. So I would, if you're thinking about security automation, one of the things that I do with folks is really sit down and think, for every one of those 7 threat actions that we mentioned in the beginning, do you have a process to address one of those threat actions? Okay, how long does each one of those processes take? If you were to look at every event that really needed to be investigated, how many FTEs would you need to really do the job that you would have to do to protect your organization well, and then calculate out what would your return on investment be, right? Would you really have to spend $1 million every year to do the job? Would you need to spend $2 million, $3 million to do the job? Instead of just saying, we acknowledge and we accept the fact that we're not going to be able to investigate every one of these alerts. So it's a very simple calculation to do. If it's something that you would like assistance with or help with, we're always happy to help. But we've gone into some organizations and they've went down this path. We've walked in and they've said, we've already calculated how much money we could save if we could just automate the investigation of email phishing. And it's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars because they knew that they weren't investigating everything that they should have. So the interesting part about this is really when it comes to building the team. And we discovered something fairly interesting. What security engineers like to do, especially good ones that really like to threat hunt, right? They're digging into a platform like Splunk and they've got that intuitive sense and they're looking for indicators of compromise. Maybe you're aligned to something like the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and they really love looking for unapproved registry key changes, right? Maybe they love scouring through firewall logs and correlating, authentication attempts that would be physically impossible. Those if they're a more senior resource, we found that those folks generally do not like to sit and bang out code all day. It's just not in their makeup. And so what we found is we had to bring in individuals, and we actually just started to look for sort of junior, mid-level developers. We found that there was a lot of talent out there in that space, and we tried to align our more senior folks with a decent enough programming background to learn how to interact with RESTful APIs, that understood logic and could understand decision trees. And we would pair the senior security resource up with, junior mid-level developers. And what we found is it allowed us to codify all of that tribal knowledge that our more senior analysts had. We had to, getting back to the process, we had to get down on paper what those processes were. And we had to document them out. We had to articulate every action in that decision tree, if you will, that senior analyst would make. Well, if I see this type of email phishing and it's targeting our CTO, we will do a who is lookup. We will see the age of the domain. The age of the domain might be an indicator if it's a fast flux attack, right? If it's a command and control system, we might do a spell check analysis to do an analysis. A lot of email phishing samples have a higher than average spelling error. We would look at certain keywords that would say wire transfer, payment, things like that. And we had to really extract all of that knowledge from the senior analyst's head and then get it down into a workflow diagram. And then as a business, you have to ask the question, right? What's the value of an asset? When can we take a proactive action on that asset? What is an asset that is so critical that we might not be able to take it offline? And then again, how do we go back and how do we codify that information? We have a tremendous amount of folks in the field. And, if there's a sales rep or an engineer at the field and they hit a watering hole attack and, somebody gets access to their system and, it's ransomware or something, we as an organization, we're very comfortable with immediately taking access on that endpoint. If you are a medical organization and you're running Epic, or you are, a different type of organization, you're running SAP, it's very, very likely that you are not going to automatically knock that system offline. They're just too critical. But even in those cases, what you can do is you can take that investigative time down from, let's say, 75 minutes. If we had a person doing it, manually, we were able to take that time down to 2 minutes. So now, instead of spending an hour or more just doing the investigation, that analyst is immediately able to get, or within about 2.5 minutes, that analyst is immediately able to get that data at his or her fingertips, escalate to the resource owner, and sort of, give them a clear idea. This is the situation we're in, right? We're seeing ransomware. We are seeing registry key changes. We're seeing persistence being invoked on this very, very critical system. We need to sound the alarms. So even if you can't take an immediate action to isolate the resource on the network, you can drastically accelerate the time that it takes to do that investigation. And that all goes back to sort of the API theme that we were discussing in the beginning. If you have, let's say, an endpoint solution or a networking solution that allows you to reach out and touch and take action on that device, then you can really start to be proactive, right? In the public cloud space, you might hear the term self-healing data center, right? You have Netflix is a really great example. They have this cool thing called Chaos Monkey and Chaos Gorilla, where it just goes and it just starts terminating instances. What we really need to start developing is the mindset of a self-defending data center. That's really what we need to start developing a mindset around. And so, going back to those 3 tenets that the AHEAD security practice, believes in, security is a process, not a product. You can't automate something you don't have a process for. And if it's a bad process, if the process is producing poor quality, it's like you're just hitting the gas on your car and you're just going to drive yourself into a wall even faster. And so, all of those things really perfectly align when you start thinking about security automation for an organization, especially at any scale or that has a lot of intellectual property. So again, there, just to sort of, because this is important, a lot of folks have asked, they're like, who do you look for? We've had a lot of customers that have had security automation positions out and open, and they haven't been able to fill them. We have really brought them in sort of out of college, trained them ourselves, and we've had to build them up. And we've had to find folks that really like to develop but are also interested in security. So even if you just want to chat like, hey, how do I build out a security automation team within my organization? You want to do this yourself? Happy to chat with the type of folks that we were looking for, how we integrated with them with our team. So for the next webinar that we're going to be putting on, it's going to be a lot more technical in nature, right? We're going to get down into the bits and bytes, if you will. We're going to be talking about Phantom as a platform, giving you an overview of Phantom and how we've used it, API considerations, and there's a ton to consider here. This gets very, very detailed. Not all APIs are created equal. We are a partner to a lot of different vendors, and we have evaluated, we would ask a vendor, say, do you have an API? And they would say, yeah, we have an API. And then we would actually go and start looking and digging through that API, and the API would allow you to run a report. That would be it. If you are talking to your vendors, don't just ask them if they have an API, make them explain to you in detail what you can accomplish with those APIs. Can I make a change on the system? Can I isolate the system? Can I, let's say, write a PowerShell or a Python script and execute it on the system? Things like that. Those are all critically important things to understand when you are evaluating tools and platforms for your security automation program. We'll talk about Playbook Development. This ties into a little bit about those 7 things that we help people focus on. If you can automate the investigation of 7 things that are proven to be enacted in 99% of data breaches, you are going to be in a very, very good position. And we sort of have the saying when it comes to information security, like you don't want to be the slowest zebra in the herd. make it difficult for your attackers to gain access to your environment. And then we'll talk about some of the things, as we've gone through is we learned, how do you construct a playbook that's reusable? So if you have a similar threat of investigation actions, how do you deconstruct those actions? How do you make them so that they're reusable components? Playbooks can call other playbooks. So those will all be things that we discuss when we get into the more technical session of our webinar on the next round. And thank you. I wanted to leave some time for questions. So do we have any questions that have come in thus far?
No questions in chat, Stephen. If anyone have any questions, please you can come off mute or post in chat.
No questions?
No questions. Quite group today.
Well, if there's any that you think about afterwards, I'm happy to follow up. What I would say is if you are even considering security automation, I would highly advise it. I can tell you from personal experience, it's definitely helped myself. And it is absolutely a trend that we're seeing in the industry. And unlike some trends, I would say, it's a little bit more smoke and mirrors. It is absolutely possible to start automating a significant portion of your security workload, at least from an investigative perspective. Even if you're not ready to automatically remediate, it is absolutely possible to start accelerating the investigation piece.